Harvard Divinity School.
The Male Body in Ultra-Orthodox Jewish Theology, March 24th, 2022.
Good evening. I'm Ann Browdy, the director of the Women's Studies in Religion program here at Harvard Divinity School. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to our online audience, as well as to those who for the first time in 2 years are here joining us in person in the James Room of the newly opened Swartz Hall. It's my very first time standing behind this podium in this beautiful new room, and I've been here for 22 years, so it's a big event. Let me invite our online audience to let us know in the chat where you're zooming in from, just so we can have a little bit of community from with those of you who are not here in the room. I know we have an international audience tonight, and I send special greetings to those of you who are in very distant time zones. Thank you all for joining us for this celebration and discussion of the newly published book by Yakir Englander, The Male Body in Ultra-Orthodox Jewish Theology. It's a great honor that today we have two of the most distinguished scholars of feminist studies in Judaism, Susanna Heschel and Daniel Boyarin, to help us engage and discuss this path-breaking book. The Male Body in Ultra-Orthodox Jewish Theology is the fruit both of Yakir Englander's unusual intellectual autobiography, of which more in just a moment, and of the year he spent here at Harvard Divinity School as a research associate in the Women's Studies in Religion program. I well remember when we received Yakir's application, and Susanna Heschel, as a member of our advisory committee at WSRP, tried to explain to our search committee just how unique is the perspective that Yakir Englander brings to the academy. He's one of very few voices that lovingly brings together the world of the yeshiva in which he was raised with the world of feminist theory that he studied during his doctorate at Hebrew University, his postdoc at Northwestern, and his year here at the WSRP. His first book, Sexuality and the Body in the New Religious Zionist Discourse, was published in both Hebrew and English, which set the model for this book as well, which was published first in Hebrew in a version that was aimed at a rabbinic audience, and now in the text that we have today in a version aimed at us, an English-speaking audience who need to be introduced to the world of ultra-Orthodox thought. You can see that Yakir is a bridge builder. As a peace activist, he worked to build bridges between Muslim, Christian, and Jewish youth in his role as International Vice President of Kids for Peace. And he now works to build bridges between disparate Israelis and Americans and a surprising array of Jewish voices as director of the Gavanim Leadership Program at the Israeli-American Council. What I most appreciate, Yakir, is his ability to communicate his love of the text and of the traditions of Jewish pedagogy. During his year at the Divinity School, he managed to make love of Jewish texts so contagious that a group of HDS students studied an entire tractate of Talmud with Yakir. It took them well into the summer after they were supposed to have gone on vacation. They just kept studying and studying till they finished the entire tractate. I'm not sure that's happened at HDS before or since, but it's really something to celebrate. So let me now briefly introduce our two distinguished respondents who I know are well known to many of you. We will first hear from Daniel Boyarin, who is the Taubman Professor of Talmudic Culture and professor in the departments of Near Eastern Studies and Rhetoric at the University of California at Berkeley, as well as an affiliated member of the Women's Studies program. He currently serves as the Gruss Visiting Professor in Talmudic Civil Law here at Harvard in the law school, where divinity students are taking full advantage of his course on the Talmud for all. He served as a visiting professor here at the Divinity School in 1997. He's the author of 9 well-known books in Jewish studies, including Judaism, the Genealogy of a Modern Notion, and he's very well known in gender studies for his books Unheroic Conduct, The Rise of Heterosexuality, and the Invention of the Jewish Man, as well as Carnal Israel, Reading Sex in Talmudic Culture. His next book, which we look forward to, is called The No-State Solution, A Jewish Manifesto. After we hear from Professor Boyarin, we will hear from my friend. They're both, Daniel is now a friend. We've only gotten to really know each other this semester, but for many years I've known Susanna Heschel, the Eli M. Black Distinguished Professor of Jewish Studies at Dartmouth College. In addition to her earned doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania and her 4 honorary doctorates from universities in the United States, Canada, and Germany, she holds her most significant degree, the Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, where quite a few years after her graduation, she delivered the Dudleyan Lecture, which is the oldest named lectureship at any university in the United States. And she delivered that here at the Divinity School in 2005 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the admission of women to the school, entitled From Jesus to Shylock, Christian Supersessionism in the Merchant of Venice. She's well known for her pioneering publications on Jewish feminism, as well as her contributions to Black-Jewish relations and civil rights, while her own scholarship focuses on Jewish and Christian interactions in Germany during the 19th and 20th centuries, including the history of biblical scholarship and Jewish scholarship on Islam. Her most recent book is The Aryan Jesus, Christian Theologians and the Bible in Nazi Germany. And we very much look forward to her forthcoming book, Jewish Studies and the Woman Question, which she is co-authoring and editing with Sarah Imhoff. Now let me say just a few words about our plan for the evening. Each speaker will make brief remarks. I've asked them for no more than 15 minutes, and then they will have a chance to respond to each other before we open to questions from the audience. We will give Yakir an opportunity to respond after we've heard from Daniel and Susanna. For those of you here in the live audience, when we get to audience questions, we will have microphones, which we'll have a student moving around with the microphone. And for those of you who were online, please place your questions in the chat, and we will add them to the queue. So, Daniel, may I ask you to come to the podium? Professor Boyarin.
Thank you. I'm going to bring my copy of the book up because I want you to see how challenging it was. Every one of these little copper darts, they're called book darts, is a place where I stood still for a while and just thought. Now, Yakir knows that I actually found reading this book quite a troubling experience. So we're going to proceed in the order of the Passover Haggadah, from the less, how should we say, less amina to the happier moments. I actually am very troubled by this book. Not by the scholarship is excellent, but by the presentation. And I'll say what I mean. First of all, I begin with the title, The Male Body in Ultra-Orthodox Jewish Theology. Now, one thing I know is it's tough to hold authors responsible for titles because the people who want to sell books can be quite aggressive about the title. But this title is particularly troubling for several reasons. First of all, well, I'm troubled by the whole term ultra-Orthodox. I think this is a seriously problematic and almost pejorative name for a religious group, not even a sect, but a group of modern Jews, and what even more to the point, and this is going to bring me to the fundamentals of my critique, not in the slightest a unified or monolithic group, right? Now, the book itself pays more attention to the fact that it's not a monolithic group. I want to say that to be fair, right? But this this presentation is already very troubling, and I'll go into just a little bit of detail on that. What Yakir has done, and he knows that this is what I'm going to say. We had a very friendly conversation with the help of a bottle of Slovenian wine. So about this, right? What Yakir has done is he has, for the most part, given, I think, a very striking, rhetorically compelling picture of the most extreme version of a certain line of thinking in contemporary Jewish thought. This extreme version is not even, much as it would like to present itself as, a continuation of, and that point comes out in the book, but I think it's not central enough. It's not even a continuation or a faithful continuation or a accurate continuation of pre-World War II Jewish theology about bodies, about male bodies, about Torah, about marriage itself. It's in large part, a reaction, one version of a reaction against the rupture and tragedy of Jewish life and the Jewish world and the Jewish people that took place during World War II. I don't need to name that tragedy or the source of that rupture. So, and again, in fairness, all this is in the book, but the primary presentation is so effectively in the presentation of that extreme version that I think that certainly the naive reader, and all I mean by naive here is the reader without much background or context, is almost bound to think that is the way that the I can't use the word ultra-Orthodox, I hate it, the Haredische Jewish community, by and large, enacts their lives. Now, I have never, ever been a full participant in that life. But I've been close to it, very close to it, for many years in different ways. Relatives. I've spent extensive time in kollel and in yeshivas of that type as an adult, and as well as my grandfather's world. That was very, very much of that into which he introduced me. And it doesn't, in my view, articulate the sense of the life of these communities that I have experienced. Now, I will allow for one possibility, which is that Yakir's work is more characteristic of the Israeli than the American. I mean, the yeshivas that I know are Lakewood, Tells, Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, which are absolutely in that Haredische Litvak Lithuanian world, but are not really represented in the picture that you give of the ideal. And the chapter that I found most illuminating personally was the chapter on Slobodka towards the end of the book, which describes, and I'll just fill in a sentence or two what I'm talking about, describes much more closely the way I have experienced the modern Lithuanian yeshivas, worlds in which dignity, cleanliness, even kind of what we call Edelkeit, which is the ideal of these yeshiva participants, which means nobility, as I'm sure all HDS students know. And with it a kind of delicacy and gentleness, in part symbolized by what I consider to be one of the great possibilities for handshakes in the world, namely this, which the anti-Semites, of course, hated, and then the Zionists hated it too. So there is much to critique in the Haredi world, much to critique in the literature in the Lithuanian yeshiva communities, and I will be the first to say that. And a lot of what needs serious critique has to do with gender, and has to do with the place of women. Although I will say that my great-grandmother and all my aunts were famous for their learning, not of Talmud. But my great-grandmother was known for knowing the whole Bible by heart from beginning to end, in Hebrew, of course, and for starting schools and schools for women and things of that sort in the heart of the world that you're describing, Yakir, in Tells in Lithuania before they came to America. So there's a picture here that is significant, and I wish, if I were allowed to wish, that it had been more broadly contextualized and contrasted. There's more I could say, but I don't want to take up too much time. I think that I found it telling, and with this I'll finish, that many of the descriptions, particularly in the very promising and useful chapter about the hagiographies, as you call hagiographies. By the way, I don't think they're Jewish saints. I think that's already, but you didn't say that, I'm sure, in Hebrew, and somehow it got translated, just as responsa got translated into Q&A. So you got to watch out for your translators also when you can. That's so many of the texts that are used in that chapter, especially, but not only in that chapter, are anonymous. This suggests to me that the people writing them were themselves somehow, it suggests to me, I can't prove it, were somehow outliers, very extreme voices that probably, or I have very good reason to think, would have been very, very controversial had they exposed themselves. And really last, when I was in my 20s, a young student of Talmud and such matters, now I'm an old student of Talmud and such matters, but I got very, very involved in Musar. I found it extremely compelling. Largely, initially through reading Chaim Grada's wonderful novel Tzemach Atlas. And I went to talk to my teacher about it, my teacher at the Jewish Theological Seminary, who was himself a Slobodka Talmud. And he said to me, don't read any Musar books anymore. Just Chovot HaLevavos and Mesilas Yesharim and nothing else. So there was you mention it, you cite it, that there was a powerful internal critique of this extremism, and yet somehow the message of the book is that this is the dominant and practically the only strain of thought about maleness in the yeshiva world. I'm finished. Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here at the Divinity School, and I thank you, Anne, for inviting me. It was wonderful also to hear what Daniel said, and I also agree with so much of what you said, Daniel. I thank you. And Yakir, I've known you for some years, and I think this is a fascinating book. I think it's a groundbreaking book. And as I read it, I was thinking of Al Rabato's book from years and years ago, his first book on slave religion, because it was also a groundbreaking book, which means essentially there was no historiography to wrestle with. This is a new book. And I think some of the points that you raised, Daniel, are precisely the issues that will be taken up in the future. But this is what happens when something is foundational, when it opens a new field. And you've brought, Yakir, some amazing texts and amazing ideas for us to think about not only in terms of Judaism, but of course, as students of religion, many different traditions. And that's what I'm interested in. I also come, as Daniel does and as Yakir does, from a family that is what is called ultra-Orthodox or Haredi, very, very pious. I come from a Hasidic background, not from Lithuanian background, but it's all right. We're friends now. But I understand why that world is so compelling. It is a world, as Daniel said, of nobility, of gentleness, of compassion. And in fact, I was told actually by my father that there's one word to characterize Judaism. It's Rahmanis, it's compassion. It's compassion of God, and it's the compassion of human beings for God, as well as for other human beings. I see in that world joy, seriousness, and passion, lots of passion. And that's what I think you're bringing out in your book, Yakir. And that's what I want to talk about. And what I also want to talk about really is the larger question for me, which is, what does it mean in the world of men that you're talking about? Where are the women? What is the absent presence? Because you can be absent, but you're very present. And sometimes what's not stated can be, in fact, the most important thing in a text, as we all know. So what is this all about? It's about the desire to be holy, to be holy, to lead a life of sanctity, of piety. But the question that I always have wondered about, and I don't understand, why is holiness, cultivating the holiness of the soul, so dependent on control of sexuality, the body, and gender segregation? Why is that? And it's in all religions, so that's what I've never understood. And of course, what Yakir, you talk about is this desire of the yeshiva world, not just to have a place, a yeshiva where you study, but to make the whole world into a yeshiva, the whole world. It's more than that. So what is the Haredi society? Some say that it's anti-modern, Avi Ravitsky. Some say it's focused on the text rather than human beings, Chaim Soloveitchik. But perhaps the Haredi world in some way is in fact quintessentially modern. Why? Because it's obsessed with women. And the woman question is the modern question in all facets of life, religious and otherwise. The female body is the Musar problem, as the modernity is the woman problem. It's her body that's the site of both honor and shame, transgression, negotiation, invention of tradition, and the revolt against tradition. So modern Jewish thought and all varieties of religion and religionlessness is all about the construction of the pagan and the secular, which are usually identical, but through various alternating Jewish alliances with Christianity or with Islam. And the danger of the pagan is the danger of femaleness, while the danger of the secular is the danger of women. This Musar is extraordinarily powerful, and I assume you're referring, Daniel, to Professor Lieberman. And I also read Tzemach Atlas, the work of Chaim Grada, and actually knew him. Musar, this obsession with one's ethical life, a life of interiority. There's really no English translation for it, but it has a haunting presence. Once you enter the world of Musar, whether you enter the physical yeshiva or you read a text, you'll never be the same. It stays with you. It's inside of you forever, and it's hard to think about anything else. It takes control of your mind. And Musar, Yakir writes on page 89, establishes, quote, the boundary between the soul and the body through a sharp distinction between reflective and non-reflective existence. The reflective mind, he writes, on the one hand, is the unique sign of the divine image in man. On the other hand, all other objects in the world, including the non-reflective body, are not essentially human. It's a very interesting passage. Every page of the book is interesting. But this leads us to a complex and fascinating set of theological problems. Men and women are separated in Orthodox synagogues, and the degree of orthodoxy is measured largely by the height and thickness of the separation. And even by himself, the male body at prayer is divided by the gartel, the belt that he ties around his waist that separates the upper part of his body, the mind, the heart that prays, from the lower part, namely digestion, genitalia, that are the concerns of women. The gartel divides the male body between male and female. So this separation, the mechitza of the synagogue, is not only in the synagogue, but it's in the male body itself. And of course, women have no such mechitza because they are entirely of one part. There's nothing to divide. That upper male body, Yakir writes, is, quote, the unique sign of the divine image in man. An implicit reiteration of Jewish understanding, I would say, of incarnation, the incarnation of God in Torah and of Torah in men. And this is elaborated in what he discusses, Yakir discusses the understanding of men making love to their wives to show compassion to the woman the way God shows compassion to human beings. What we don't hear is of women like God showing compassion to men. So the goal is to create sanctity, to live a holy life, and men and women both strive for that holiness. Yet that sanctity is created not only through prayer, study, observance of Jewish holidays, but also through sexual behavior by infusing an eroticism in nearly all that is undertaken. And it is very much an erotic world, the Haredi world. What is true and puzzling is that there's an intense atmosphere of homoeroticism in Haredi society, that it's the natural result of men living in an all-male community in a yeshiva, especially during their adolescent and teen years. They study and debate, they play and tease one another. And I quote what Yakir writes on page 127. He describes young adolescent boys learning sections of Talmud dealing with female virginity, seduction, and even rape, quote, without having any personal reaction. They are expected to be immunized from sexual arousal, even when reading explicit physical descriptions of women from Talmudic texts. Of course, we know they do react in dreams and fantasies. Sex is sex, even in the Talmud, and especially if you're a 14-year-old boy learning and living in an all-male setting. But what happens to that erotic energy? So it's as if the goal of Haredi society, and I would say of many pious societies and religions, the goal is to produce homoeroticism. And we should take that seriously. What is the link between homoeroticism and the holy? That's the question that I keep wondering about. We know that homosexual relations are rampant in many yeshiva communities and in island communities such as Bnei Brak, a town in Israel. The yeshiva creates the homoerotic longing that it simultaneously condemns. You know what Lord Alfred Douglas called the love that dare not speak its name, or the well of loneliness of Radcliffe Hall. But perhaps it also creates a tension that heightens the erotic. For the Haredi community, as Yakir makes clear, the issue is not just love and sex, but that flesh can be dangerous, even contaminating of holiness. So boys are taught from age 3 to pee without touching themselves. Male masturbation is forbidden. Women may masturbate and make love with other women. One sees quickly how radical gender taboo creates a mentality that can also justify radical racial difference. Gender and race, as we well know as students of religion, enable each other. Sex with a Gentile woman and a Jewish man is a sin for which there is no repentance, the Zohar says, but it happens. But how does this male world look from women's point of view? And in fact, women are actually not absent from this all-male scene. On the contrary, there is an omnipresent conscious and unconscious awareness that men have of women's presence, even when women are absent. That absent presence of women penetrates men's souls. It brings dirty thoughts, even during prayer. Gazes from the women's gallery in the synagogue, on the streets, in the shops. The result? Haredi men call for increased segregation in buses, even on sidewalks. Haredi men experience this penetration on many levels. They penetrate Torah with their circumcised penises, and that's the only way to understand Torah, as Elliot Wolfson has shown. They are imaginatively or actually penetrated by their male study partners, chavruta. And while they are supposed to penetrate their wives, in fact, they are penetrated by women. She enters the public square, the street, tempting men. In his mind, his imagination, she carries out an inverse sexual intercourse. She penetrates him. Why the obsession? One might say that women possess men not simply to seduce them into heterosexual relations, but also to endanger their homoeroticism, and women are therefore taboo. Now, as much as women and sex are taboo, men must enact heterosexual marriage and penetrate women. It's a commandment. But what's it like? Ultimately, the Haredi problem is not that sex is simply condemned or oppressed, but rather how a man filled with homoerotic desire marries a woman and fulfills an obligation of heterosexual intercourse. How is homoerotic desire created? How is heteroerotic sex created within an intensely homoerotic environment? How do women experience relations with such men? Okay, men should not touch themselves for pleasure. How is it for a woman when she touches him and he touches her? A man who has been forbidden to experience sexual pleasure through touching himself, how does he touch her? Is the divine compassion for her that the man is told to express through sexual intercourse experienced by her as divine compassion? To whom does a virgin belong? Her father possesses her as a daughter, but does not mark her with his penis. The first intercourse that she has with her husband turns her from virgin into a Jew. She bleeds, as Avital Eshed, who was a fellow here, has written about. That's how a woman becomes a Jew. Now, I have no doubt that there is great joy, passion, and love in many or most of these couples in the Haredi world. I think there's enormous passion in that world. But I also think that they are struggling with the same problems we are, the modern problem, how to keep love in sexual pleasure. Too many Haredi women report that they experience the wedding night as rape by a man they barely know. And consent is not only about saying yes, it's about knowing the person and feeling known by the other. Now, in tribute to a student at Harvard Divinity School who sadly graduated before I got here, Emily Culpepper, remember? I want to bring to your attention, some of you may have been to museums where Jewish religious objects are displayed. They'll show a Torah scroll, maybe a Kiddush cup, to fill in a talit. Sometimes, especially in Germany, they show a circumcision knife, something I've never quite understood. But I want to show you an object that I have not yet seen displayed in a Jewish museum. You know what this is? I brought one for everybody, so you can pass them around. This is, here. You can take one, pass it around. This is a Badika cloth. This is a Badika cloth. This is the cloth that women use, wrap around their finger, and insert in the vagina twice a day during the week following menstruation to see if there's any blood or stain that needs, or whether they are quote unquote clean. Because after you finish menstruating, you wait 7 clean days before you can have intercourse again with your husband. Now, I bring this to you because I wish this would be more on display, because these are things I think should be brought into the open and understood. The vagina is actually the most frequently discussed anatomical body part in the Talmud by religious men who discursively claim authority over it, discussing in detail the size and shape of its leaks and examining the cloths that women have to use to examine themselves twice a day after menstruation. Is the stain on the cloth blood from the vagina or from the uterus? This, the rabbi determines. The vagina, then, is the woman, or perhaps the fetishized woman. As Naomi Shore writes in her book, Reading in Detail, there is an inherently fetishistic process and that incremental fragment cathexis whereby the individual parts eventually crowd together and usurp the original whole. Or, as Emily Apter has written in her book on fetish, the detail has just this tendency to prick consciousness, to encroach on the terrain of inner feelings, to expand to the point of obsession. It is not the vagina alone or the stains that it produces on white cloths, but rather it's the reading of the fetishism of reading. That is, not the stained cloth or the vagina, but the interpretive process of the rabbi's interpretations that constitute the male fetish that dominates the Haredi world. For women, this is part of sanctifying ourselves, bringing the stained cloth to the rabbi for his scopophilia and determinative assessment. Is she permitted to her husband's penis, or must she wait again for 7 clean days. One of those quintessential religious experiences that religious Jewish women have that can either feel like horrific shame or glorious erotic arousal, bringing your stained badika cloth or underpants for the rabbi's inspection. The rabbinical discussions create the sense of the vagina's mystery, otherness, and sacrality. The rabbis take over the vagina, but perhaps don't feel they fully own it, an insecurity that leads to its fetishization. And this helps me understand a bit about this obsession with sexuality. It's fetish as the perversion that regulates all the rest. In his essay on fetishism, Freud points to the, quote, Chinese custom of mutilating the female foot and then revering it like a fetish after it has been mutilated. It seems as though the Chinese male wants to thank the woman for having submitted to being castrated, end quote. It is, to me, a perfect definition of patriarchy, or perhaps the patriarchal wish. One might think that women without a penis and with our vaginas appropriated, that we might feel castrated. And yet the vagina fetish belongs to the men of the Talmud, perhaps as expression of their anxiety, appropriating the vagina, controlling what comes out and what and when they may go in, is a sadistic erotic that creates the extraordinary notion of tzaddik yesod olam. The phallus is the foundation of the world, the one and only tool to properly penetrate and understand Torah. And so, Yakir, I thank you for your book, for giving rise to a great attention to the material that you've presented. You've actually gathered some extraordinary data for us to think about, and you've certainly stimulated us to think more deeply about the nature of religion, the holy, the body, and sexuality. I thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Toda. Thank you for the women's studies in the divinity school, to the Jewish studies, to the studies of women, gender, and sexuality. And thank you for hosting us. Thank you for giving me a year to breathe outside of the work of the conflict in Israel and Palestine, and to be able to breathe and to write and to heal. Thank you so much to Danielle for your words. I was worried for a second that we will all agree, and then it will be so non-Jewish dialogue. So Danielle, toda. And Susanna, a großes koach. One thing that people ask me, why did you write about men? Why you didn't write about women? I felt it will be not tznius, it will not be modest if a man, even if my pronounce is he, him, first incarnation, I'm not sure about myself, but still, I can't do it. And I needed someone to say the words about the woman in the Ultra-Orthodox. So thank you so much for giving voice. I'm so looking forward to see the books that will be much more important about the women bodies in the Ultra-Orthodox world. So what I want to do with you tonight, I want to say something about how I write books. When I wrote my book in Hebrew, the title was like half a page because I wrote it to the Ultra-Orthodox and I wanted them to read it. Now, the critique was that Ultra-Orthodox people start writing me emails or phone calls when some of them didn't have emails, and they complain that I'm too soft, that I'm writing to the rabbis and not to them because I could be more harsh. And I said, it's true, I wrote it to your rabbis. I want to do change from inside. When I wrote it in English, I wrote it not only for the Jewish readers. I actually didn't write it to the ultra-Orthodox, because they will read probably the Hebrew version, I want to write it as an example for people who deal with religion, sexuality, and the body, Jews and non-Jews, to be able to try to understand something very deep when we say words as body. And therefore, I try to give the language, and of course, if you go to the footnotes, so you understand that, of course, the She'elot v'Teshuvot, the deep genre of questions, is not Q&A, but I try to give words to people who will understand it and they will not feel, oh, it's only for 5 people, in the academy. I want the general audience to join to this chavruta and to study together. But tonight, I want to take you to the journey that I'm walking in the past 2 years after I rewrite this book, and my translator who tried to render it, it's not to translate, to render it, Dr. Henry Ralph Kars. And what I want to do with you, I want to invite you to a journey and to take you a little bit to how I'm thinking about the book today and about this question. So let's start with the question of why the ultra-Orthodox is such a fascinating example. Why there is disproportion of books, academic books, that it's written about the ultra-Orthodox. Sometimes, for sure in Israel, when you look on the percentages of the community, this is not the largest Jewish community. And I think that when you leave the Jews, when you leave the gossip, when you leave the complications with Israeli army and with hipster Hasidish and all of that, I think that they ask a very interesting question, or they have a desire that we all actually want to. And the desire is, how can I feel free? Freedom. But here comes the second part. Without feeling daily anxiety. Because many of us in Western society, we feel free. But there is a price. We feel huge amount of anxiety. And the ultra-Orthodox, when I think about their project, and I don't think that they, by definition, by the ultra-Orthodox don't try to give you like definition of things, which is another thing that we try to do in the academy. They don't care about that. But this is actually what they wish to do. There is a verse in Leviticus that says that God says to the Jewish people, you are my slaves. And the Jewish interpretation for that, one of the Jewish interpretation of that says, you are my slaves, and therefore you are my slaves, but you are not slaves to anyone else. It's like, it's better to be the slave for God, but at least you don't need to be a slave for so many complications that life brings us. And I think that the ultra-Orthodox, for sure the Lithuanian mitnagdim that I'm speaking, dedicated this book to, they try to tell you, be a slave or submit yourself to the Jewish text. By the way, it's interesting, it's not to God, it's to the Jewish text. But then something is happening. When you are 100% submitted to your life only to the Jewish text, then almost any interpretation is welcome. So you gain the freedom. And they also want to believe that you will gain freedom from anything else that will disturb you from being submitted to the Jewish text. So I want to give you a small example from not radical, but totally normal rabbi in the ultra-Orthodox community. So he tells a story about 2 students who study in Chavruta, the dialogue that we have. And one of them said, you will not believe, last night I dreamt about God. So his Chavruta tells him, there is no chance you dreamt about God. So he said, well, I'm telling you, I was dreaming about God. So he said, never a chance. So he said, how do you know that I didn't dream about God? So he said, listen, the Jewish text says that one only dream about what he dedicated his life in the past day. You study with me Jewish texts all day. When did you have time to think about God? Now, why it's such a good story that is, by the way, quoted in so many of the majority ultra-Orthodox books? Because the challenge that they have, the ultra-Orthodox community, this community, is that at one point they submitted themselves so much to the text that they got freedom even from God. So you have these stories about students and rabbis who just like, it's the time to stop learning and they want to go to pray. You need to go to pray, and they can't make themselves to go to pray. Or as one of them said, I pray Talmud. Like I say very fast the words, and then I am with the Talmud. I mean, look at the yeshiva world. They have the prayer books, the Siddur, but then just under that, they have the Talmud. So you submitted yourself, and then you got freedom from everything. And I will come back to that. The challenge is that we're a human being, and therefore we are living, and you can't do it. It's a beautiful story. As one of my friend who is an ultra-Orthodox head of yeshiva with 12 kids, he told me, he's very upset about the ultra-Orthodox world sometimes, and he said, you know what is our problem? We are genius to raise kids. We are catastrophe in raising adults. Kids need beautiful story. Yes, no, black and white, kosher, non-kosher, Shabbos, non-Shabbos. Try to raise adults like that. It will become unhealthy community. And the major challenge that they have or they identify is their bodies. And this is where, Susan, you said everything. I don't need to say anything more. The body is not only the body, and this is what I try to show in the book. Very fast, in the 50s and 60s, is only in the writings. Today, it's in the life. The body become also my feelings when I don't feel well. My body become my desires. My body become my sisters. My body become the street. And you name it. And for sure, the non-Jewish community, etc., etc. And then you have a problem. So what they try to do in the body, what they try to do is that they want to create safe zones where I can live freely with my body. The way how I'm speaking now is a very yeshivish way. I don't think what my hands are doing. But it's a safe zone. No one is going to be hurt by my hands now. And they try to push the safe zone more and more and more. So it starts in the yeshiva, and then what happens when you have the chavruta, a man, and the text. And they all have a huge desire towards the text, and they love the text. And then sometimes it's like, oh, we both love the text, and we love the text, and we love the text, and like, I like you, I love the text, I like you, I love the text, I love you. This become a problem. And the rabbis today in the 21st century, they speak about that. Do they have solutions? Some of them try to deal with that. In chapter 6, I dedicate a whole chapter to a rabbi who pushed the boundaries so much because he cared about the students that at one point he decided to leave the Ultra-Orthodox community. Because he said, I cannot be there and hold this theology. It will not help them, it will not help me. And today he is doing incredible other things. Now I want to speak about a few challenges. Two kinds of challenges. One is an inner ultra-Orthodox challenge. The challenge is, first of all, that as we are walking with the bodies, and the ultra-Orthodox community, fascinating, decides sometimes to live in the middle of Western society. It's like in the middle of Antwerp, in the middle of Brooklyn. My friends from Brooklyn, we know that. It's like, it's not that they are living in a city like in Israel, where I was living, that I never saw even a modern Orthodox Jew until I was like 18. Here they open the door and they see some are in Brooklyn. This is one challenge. The second challenge that you mentioned is the Zionist movement. I mean, the Zionist movement, what they try to claim is Jews, we must have bodies. They kill us because we don't have strong body. This is what we do. This is what we need. We can't continue to live in the text. The text killing us. We must have bodies. So this is the second, because they are living in Israel, many of them. And of course, what you mentioned when we come to women. What do they see when they see a woman? As one of my friends said, it's not can they have sex, can they have intimacy? This is a very hard question. Go and speak with my sisters. They will have a lot to say about that. But now I want to go back to us, and I will end with that. I want to come to 2 points that I just want to think, and I'm thinking and living it and thinking about that in the past 2-3 years a lot. I mentioned that the Ultra-Orthodox community created the institute, the yeshiva, as a safe zone. And one of the gifts in this safe zone that they let themselves is to fail, but in a safe way. There will never be a rabbi, I never met the rabbi who will say, you're stupid. There are some rabbis that maybe they will say it's a stupid question, but then it means that you got the biggest compliment. But actually, they will let you to fail in a safe way. And my question to us is, the people with the body, where are the safe zones that we can create? Safe zone where we can leave our bodies and souls, our complexity and anxiety, and live there and try to see what's happening, and that it will be safe. In a way, it's very easy to critique them, but there is so much to learn from them. I want to see this high school, this college, I want to see where is the center of cuddling. Where Harvard trained people, students, to cuddle. How to ask consent. Where do we teach people how to caress? We need to learn from them. And this is what I want to bring you by reading this book. Let's also learn from them. Not what they do, not the solutions. Let's learn about what they try to do. And I will end with the second part. You remember what I said, that it's their main mission. Their main mission is how we can be free and not feel anxiety. What I want to suggest, the next writer, is to try to see where are these areas in our lives. As someone who went to pray in mosque for 6 years, when I was a peace activist, I'm not anymore, I'm living here, but I immersed myself into the Muslim prayer, and actually I learned a lot about submit yourself and then gain freedom. I wonder where the secular people of us can do it. I want to offer maybe in BDSM. Can you submit yourself in order to feel whole and safe? Maybe we need to do something that the academy is really hard to do, is to go out and to see what the similarities and what the gifts that we can learn from each other. How we can live our bodies together with prayers. This is my wish for this book. Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you for 3 really extraordinary pieces of thought. I've been waiting for 22 years to hear passionate disagreement and loving critique at a Harvard Divinity School lecture. So I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to give everybody up here a chance to discuss and respond to what they have heard from the other panelists for a few minutes, and then we will have questions from the audience.
Well, I would say that some years ago, actually, when I was a student here, I had a friend who came out of the yeshiva world who said to me one day, Jews don't pray. Prayer is Christian. Jews say words, we're obligated to say those words, but prayer as a concept is not Jewish. Of course, he's wrong. But it was striking to me, first, that he would come out of that world with such a notion, but also that he was aware of the Christian and, in a sense, constructing his Jewish in relation to the Christian, even coming from such what a lot of people think of as a very isolated community. And it made me start to wonder, to what extent should we think in those terms? In other words, it may not just be the modern scientific scholars of Judaism who respond in some way to Christian concepts, but even in the yeshiva world, I don't know. How widespread is that awareness of Christianity and the desire to respond to it?
I mean, responding more to what Susanna is saying right now, it occurred to me in reading in the book and also in previous reading how much of Musar is actually a response, on the one hand, to a challenge from Christianity, and on the other hand, to a challenge from Hasidus. I mean, I think a large part of what's going on in Salanter, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, is a kind of understanding that there is something, that there is, from his perspective, something lacking in the extreme intellectualism of Lithuanian Litvak piety, to which he's responding. But along with that comes also a sense of how un-Talmudic so much of the modern perspective that you're describing is, how anti-Talmudic it is in so many fundamental ways. That it's not only a shift that you note from before World War II to after World War II, but certainly the discourse of sexuality, I'm not claiming it's totally disconnected from the Talmud, and there's nothing in the Talmud that instigates it, but it's almost diametrically opposed in so many ways to yeah, I think that's enough. I've said enough tonight.
I think a few things about prayers, and it's one of the challenges with interfaith dialogue that I've seen in my life is that the Jews very fast become jealous on the Christians. And I shared with the class yesterday, and I want to give you an example. So you come to the synagogue in the morning, you have 45 minutes to Shachris, to the prayer of the morning. Now, it's kind of the same time that I was praying in most of the Catholic monasteries that I visited and prayed with them. Now, the difference is that in this 45 minutes, The Catholic monks said 8 psalms. The Jews said half of a book. Now, the question is why? Why we can't just be there and feel the psalm or whatever the prayer is, the Shema, in the body? And I think that it shows a challenge, that it's really hard because of some decisions around the learning of the text. I think something that you mentioned before when we met, which is totally true, which is really bothering, that in some, thanks God only some, of the very Hasidic actually communities, there is not anymore in the new synagogue a women's section. It's like they don't even understand that women should pray, or they think that women should pray at home with their kids, try to do it with 12 kids. So there is some decisions that we need to reflect on. I have a question for you, Susan, that's really, that is walking with me for a few years. If someone will come to you to say, I want to write the book about the female body of the ultra-Orthodox. And I hope it will be she, her, they, them with female body. If she wants to write it to the ultra-Orthodox woman, what the way how she should write it? Because the critique is so complicated, as you just bring us. Like, it so makes sense that this is a problem. That how do you write text to readers when you need to help them to walk in their shoes? Something that I struggle with my books and work.
No, I understand. I think it's a great question. I'm going to be thinking about that. And I think what we have is really a conflict that we're all talking about, that on the one hand, we're talking about a world that, as Daniel said, is about nobility, the Edelkeit, yes. And on the other hand, I look at the politics of it, and I'm troubled. And it's both. And how do I keep the two in balance? I don't know. Why is this not part of the Jewish ritual objects on display in a museum? What is the absence here? This is, in fact, what defines a woman's life, a constantly used item. So why is that omitted? I think growing... So I had a Hasidic wedding, and in my family, there's a cloth that the bride is supposed to have over her face, and I always thought, oh, my cousins, they look like they're a cow being led to the slaughter. They can't see anything. And then when I got married, I just had a little nothing. And then I realized, I don't want to be seen in this moment. That the cloth was not just to let people not see me, but it was to allow me privacy of not being seen. And so, yes, to be behind a mechitza, yes, it's to be hidden away. I can say that, well, why should I be hidden away? Let the men sit back there. And on the other hand, it's the opportunity to not be seen. And that's valuable for human beings, and especially for women in this society. And on the other hand, why is that conflict even necessary in the first place? How can we overcome the need that we have this conflict and how we understand? So yes, and that is the question, and I think it's an unresolved problem for all of us who study religion, and especially women in religion. And in connection with that, I just want to say, with Musar, with this East European Musar movement that really gets under your skin, and it is really, it's this feeling of being seen all the time by God. All the time, wherever you are, God is watching you, of being seen. And I wonder about icons in Eastern Europe. And the icon is not something that you venerate. The icon sees you, responds to you. And I wonder if there's a connection. The fact that Musa grew up in that environment, in Orthodox Christianity with iconography, not among, Protestant Lutherans or something. So I don't know if anybody's ever looked into that, but it's of interest to me to be seen. And this is such a female issue.
That's a wonderful question. May I take questions from the audience? Okay, let's see. If you'll hang on for 1 second, you're going to get a microphone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Really refreshing and interesting discussion. I wonder, so I haven't read the book, I apologize in advance, but obviously a lot of the discussion this evening focused on sexuality in the male body. Is there a discussion in the book about other elements of the male body? So for example, maybe sickness, health, I'm sure, you could discuss at length different organs, growth, age, those sorts of things. I'd be curious to hear your perspective. Thank you.
So 100% yes, and thank you so much for asking this question. In the book, but it's seriously totally okay not to read it. In the book,
No, it's not.
In the book, I try to ask questions about different kind of bodies and how this community in their writings, how do they think about that and what's the results of that. So I just want to give you maybe 2 examples. So one question is about a person who has become older, when the rabbis become older, and they have challenges with like hearing or seeing. And what you see is actually that some of these rabbis celebrate that. So one of them, he said like he couldn't hear anymore. I don't know if you know, but on Friday, one of the top ultra-Orthodox rabbis passed away, and on Sunday, the funeral was with 500,000 people who came. And his father, who was an incredible leader, he had challenges with hearing, and he disagreed to have anything to help, any machine to help him. And he said, I was waiting for years that people will not disturb me to learn. So now, how many words I will have energy to write me, right? So it was before emails. So I think it's an interesting example. Or, for example, some of them had problem with seeing, and they took off the glasses, of course, when they walk to the street. So they don't even need to deal with question about modesty and the other gender. But another thing which is interesting is about feelings, the body and feelings, or the body when the body don't ask us what we want. Okay, so for example, what do you do with dreams? Okay, it's an interesting question. Can you reflect about the text in dreams? Most of them do not go to this extreme of like, like I'm dreaming about Jewish text, but they will just count the dreaming time as not being in the world. Right? One of them, who is Reb Shlomo Wolbe, he actually was deeply influenced by some of the readings of Freud, and he said it's actually something very interesting that I'm trying to understand what does it mean for me, but it's not for you, so let's leave it. Okay. So this is one example. The other example, which is very interesting, is about one of the Rabbi Yechezkel Levenstein, he was a very famous rabbi there. And he said that as he became an elder, he felt that he's crying more easily. And he said, I am not sure I can trust my tears because I think that it's not really my heart, but it's something in my being. And I'm worried about that. So it's interesting how the body play different roles in their lives. Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Yeah, question there.
Hi, thank you for coming. And this is sort of in a similar vein, but maybe I was thinking about the comments you made about sort of what would this look like in a secular setting, maybe what would submission look like? And I'm wondering if you, like what might embodied submission outside of sort of healthy sex or sexuality look like in a secular setting or in a religious setting?
Now it's open to all of us.
Yeah. It's a great question, which is clearly going to require some more thought.
No, I already heard it.
Oh, okay. Would you like to?
I would. Yeah, I might be interested in it if I could hear it.
Okay, you want to
And
try
I
it
do-
again?
And I do have my hearing.
Okay.
I think the question was basically, what would embodied submission look like in a secular or religious context outside of sex and sexuality?
Well, I'm going to ask a
It is
question.
a good question.
Thank you. I'm going to read a question asked by Rachel Edelman, who's a professor of Hebrew Bible at Hebrew College and another past research associate from WSRP. She's asking about the movement within the Orthodox world for women to reclaim checking the bedeka cloth because of the discomfort with the male prerogative in interpreting and ruling over the private sphere and the shame that may engender. So she's interested in your response to the shift in attitude towards female sexuality within the Orthodox world.
Okay, so thank you so much for the question. So it's definitely a new phenomena that happening more in the modern Orthodox community. I want to speak only about Israel. I'm less aware about the life today in American modern Orthodoxy. It's coming also to the Ultra-Orthodox, and I think it's a fascinating question because you see different ways of how women who become leaders, what they need to do in order to gain the credibility by the male rabbis, right? So it's like, when do they choose that even that they know the Jewish laws, the halacha, they still will go to the male rabbi just to be sure or to get a better confirmation. But still we see a huge shift. And you know what? 2 months ago, I met the first Orthodox Rabbanit. Rabbanit is not, so normally Rabbanit means the wife of the rabbi, right? But she is not the wife of the rabbi. She is a rabbi. And she was nominated by some of the top modern Orthodox rabbis in Israel. And she is now the Rabbanit. And what is interesting that the knowledge that these women have in order to gain their credibility, I met very few male rabbis with such a knowledge because they need to be like better than the Pope. So this is about that. I want to answer to your question. And I was waiting because, again, I will answer from Israel, and I thought maybe we will have thoughts from here, but I want to give you an example. It's going to be a political answer. To believe in peace today as a Palestinian or as an Israeli is to submit yourself to something that is not realistic. But peace activists, by submitting themselves to the faith of the ability to change, they gain the freedom to live as if there is peace already now. And this is the hardest thing to do in peace work, and I will tell you why. Because when you work with youth, as an example, and you teach them that the future can be different, you submit them to this unrealistic thing. When they become adults, they come to you and they say, why did you lie to us? You submit us to a narrative that is not real. But then, when you see them, when they become adults and they choose to live, not to do peace only, but to live with peace, you see that sometimes the submission to a narrative is giving you the freedom to be healed and then to heal others. Thank you so much for the question.
I'm going to bring one more question from our online audience from Dan Sklar. He says, Yakir, I'm struck by your characterization of the latent homoeroticism in the world of the yeshiva. I too believe there is a strong undercurrent, and in a don't ask, don't tell way, the dynamic is even prized. I must also admit, in my own liberal Jewish world, I was embarrassed to hear a rabbinic mentor explain the Talmudic relationship of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan as towel-snapping locker room talk. Why is there such a strong reluctance to name homoerotic relationships in literature when the text couldn't be clearer?
We have here two scholars that text is your life.
I don't care to comment on that. Okay. I've written what I have to say.
Okay, so go read the book. There was a question over here.
Hi, thank you so much. In your introduction, you speak about the gay pride controversy as being, opening up this question of people actually knowing about gay people in this community and how that posed such an issue. In terms of continuing access to the internet and obviously to other forms of media, how do you think that masculine images are affecting how men within these communities perceive of themselves? And what do you see the future looking like in the next 10 to 20 years? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I will quote my good friend who is a head of a yeshiva of like 15 different yeshivas, Rabbi Menachem Bombach, who said that the COVID changed the ultra-Orthodox world in like 2 years. He changed them in what will take 30 years. Because they needed to have internet at home, not at work, but at home. It's a big difference. And because, but also for other reasons. For example, for the first time, the yeshiva world was closed, right? For a few months, not all of them. We spoke before about Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Did they agree, disagree about that? But very fast also, there is a government, so there are changes. And then for the first time, for a few months, the yeshiva students were at home. Now, it's not only at home. It's not a home in Philadelphia or here in, even here that's very expensive. Still, the homes are big. It's like 2-3 rooms for 7-9 people, both gender together. They are not used to that, to be there for a few months. And you see the change. The way how you see today the change is when you go to NGOs like Hillel, not Hillel on campus like here, but Hillel in Israel or Footsteps, which are organizations that help people who decide to leave the community and only then they help them, just to make sure they don't try to convince anyone. But you see that the numbers tripled. So there is something with the change of life that hits. One more thing that I think is very important to say, and this is where I 100% agree with Professor Boyarin, that when you look today on the ultra-Orthodox, you always had like an edge. So you had the edge of people who were like between. They knew Bach and Mozart, and they read like Oliver Twist, but also they were ultra-Orthodox. Now, in the past, before the whole, I don't speak before the Holocaust. I speak like after the Holocaust. So you see that they were more on the edge. Today, because of the numbers, the edge is not an edge anymore. Today, you have a huge, large number of ultra-Orthodox who are living, in a way, very modern life. Why my book is still important also for them, or they claim, at least in Israel, that is important for them, because still this is the ideology of the Musar. So they feel that they are not good ultra-Orthodox, they are not good enough in a way, right? What you see today, and this is another thing which is interesting, is the influence of American ultra-Orthodoxy towards Israel, that you have more and more rabbis who immigrate to Israel, and they bring voices from here. And the voices from here are bringing much softer versions of ultra-Orthodoxy.
Can I just say that I experience the continued use of the term ultra-Orthodox over and over again as aggression, as an assault. I said in the beginning why I think so. It's not ultra. It's a community of people who've made certain choices that are in response to modernity. in one way or another that we can criticize, but they're not ultra anything. And they're certainly not one group of people, and you know that very well.
Of course,
So,
of course.
so listen.
Yeah. So maybe we can call them the Charedim, which is
It's a much less upsetting term.
great. So let's call them Charedim, which
Or
is
in English, we could call them shakers.
Tremblers.
That's what Haredim means.
Tremblers, yeah.
yes.
Shakers.
I would just add one other point that I'm struck by when I grew up in New York. When I'm in New York, I guess I'd say, and that is there's a way not only among Jews, but there's many groups that have been Orientalized, sometimes have an internalized desire to self-orientalize. And sometimes I wonder about that. You know, you use the phrase response to modernity, which I think is a problematic phrase for various reasons. I don't think there is a thing called modernity that one responds to, but one creates, it's a rhetorical device, but one creates what one thinks of as the modern. And I wonder what role that plays. In other words, the sense of being looked at, of being watched by God, or men by women, women by men, and so on. But there's also the external world, and religious people know that there is that external world that is also looking at them. And the question is, how does one respond? So when Homi Bhabha talks about mimicry, I think he's also talking about that kind of self-orientalization, how one presents oneself to the community that has orientalized one. And that's part of it too. I also wanted to just make a comment about women here, which I find it very striking that women have an intellectual and a moral responsibility that is really rather extraordinary, I think. That is, women are in charge of the kitchen, so the food has to be kosher, and it's very easy to mix up milk and meat and make a mistake and not tell anybody. One can do that easily. And it's the same is true with the laws of menstrual purity, of nida. And of course, the punishment for it is terrible. Your soul is cut off if you violate, if you have intercourse during menstruation. It's a very serious sin. And yet a woman can easily not bring her cloth to the rabbi, just pretend everything's okay. So she has, first of all, the knowledge to know what to do, which is really quite extensive. If you've ever tried to explain to somebody how to keep a kosher kitchen, there's a lot to remember. And there is a moral authority that she has that's invested in women. If they cheat on this, everybody's soul is cut off. So her responsibility, her moral, she's invested with a moral responsibility that I think actually in some ways goes beyond anything that a man has. Is there something that a man would, he can also mix up meat and milk and they can write, but this is something really rather remarkable to me, this moral responsibility that she is trusted with that.
I think we can take one last question if there is one here.
Hello, thank you everyone so much for your discussion and commentary. I especially wanted to thank Professor Heschel for bringing us the Bedeka cloth. I volunteer at Maim Chaim, the egalitarian mikveh, and work with a lot of people who follow laws of Nida, but I've never actually seen or used Bedeka cloth. So
You
thank
can
you.
get them there.
Great. Next time I'll ask. Thank you. My question has to do with Musar a little more generally, having read Yakir's book in our class on gender and Judaism with Professor Browdy. And the only other time before reading this book when I had encountered any kind of talk of Musar in my kind of Jewish communities that the communities that I've been in are more halachically liberal and tend to be kind of non-denominational was, Musar is Jewish mindfulness or Jewish meditation. That was sort of the only context I'd heard it in more as almost a response like Buddhism, sort of saying we have this within our own tradition. And I wondered if any of you had responses to that kind of use of Musar in other contexts.
I think it's beautiful what's happening here now with the Musar movement in America. The Musar movement, just to remember, which started with, I mean, it's a modern phenomena that started with Rabbi Israel Salander. But actually, of course, there are much more ancient books, as mentioned, as Chovat HaLevavot, Mesilat Yesharim, etc., etc., etc. I think the beauty here that as the Musar movement become only connected to specific places in Israel with the Haredi community, here in America, it's like you put seeds and you never know what will happen with the tree. Here you see an incredible use of Musar from the Mishnah, from Mishnah Avot, and up to Rabbi Israel Salanter, or the Sabbath Slobodka, etc., etc., and they use it as a way to bring mindfulness mostly into the Jewish life here. And what is fascinating that in America, I think that more and more I see synagogues, like liberal synagogues, who hold so much of the wisdom of the Musar, and they translate it to the lives, the complex life that we are all living at. And I think it's such a blessing to the Jewish world.
Thank you. Yakir, is there any final word that you want to give us before we end our conversation of your book?
I just want to say thank you. I think that something that brings so much light for me is when people who are living activism coming together with academy, and we created what we say in Hebrew, Torat Chaim, Torah of life, the wisdom of life. And will this book help in that? It's a question that I will not know because it depends on the readers. I want to end with a beautiful story from the Talmud about one of the rabbis that I think each one of us can bring it to our activism life. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That he was, of course, what we are dealing, each generation we have our dilemmas. So before he passed away, and we speak about one of the huge scholars in the Talmud, and before he passed away, he said, there are two roads or paths that are open to me. One will take me to heaven, and one will take me to hell, and I still do not know where I'm going to be taken. And I think that if us, the students of the Divinity School, people who are listening to us, if we will take this wisdom and we will write and we will act with shaken, with chirda, with the charedim, I think it will be such a blessing to all of us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Yakir, for returning to the scene of the crime where you began or worked on parts of this book. And thank you to both of our commentators. This was really such a rich conversation, and I felt your presence and your wrestling with this book and all that is in it. And I'm grateful to you and our audience for this conversation. Good night.
Sponsors: Women's Studies and Religion Program at HDS, the Center for Jewish Studies and Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality.
Copyright 2022, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.